Hello, and welcome to this LaRouchePAC podcast. Today is May the 4th. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I'm joined once again by Brian Lantz. Hi, Brian.
Good to be here. Yes.
This is the fourth in a series of podcasts where we are exploring the really extraordinary implications of the body of proposals put forward by Donald Trump that he has identified as his Agenda 47. In the first three podcasts, we've looked at Donald Trump's proposal to build 10 new freedom cities, to create quantum leaps in the American standard of living, and how these proposals, along with baby bonuses, are a complete reversal of decades and decades of policy which have locked up the West, destroyed our manufacturing base, brought down our standard of living, slowed our population growth to dangerous levels, and really infected the American population with a dangerous pessimism about what our future is. Donald Trump seeks to reverse that, and so do we. So today we're going to build on that, but we're going to take up another one of his proposals. This is his proposal to address the homeless crisis in the United States, which has certainly engulfed cities like San Francisco and Seattle, but exists really everywhere. And we're also going to address especially how this question impacts our youth. The National Council of State Legislators recently estimated that approximately 1 in 10 young adults between the ages of 18 and 25 experience homelessness each year. And they admit that this is probably a far, far undercount in terms of the number of people who are impacted, the number of young people who are impacted. Now, Trump has a very interesting idea, coupled with a very bold proposal from Brian, which we'll get to in a bit, that I think can begin to address the question which is on so many people's minds, which is, how can we save the younger generation? So first off, look, when you look at the level of homelessness, drug abuse, people being thrown on the scrap heap, or because of pessimism, throwing themselves on the scrap heap, it seems pretty overwhelming. And most of what you get from the establishment is a proliferation of social work programs that began with the Great Society back in the 1960s. It seems like there was a fundamental shift in our outlook back then, which Trump wants to reverse. So, Brian, what happened back then?
Well, I'd start with the Truman presidency, such as it was, and Trumanism, McCarthyism, but I'll focus here on the economy. We dismantled the arsenal of democracy that we had built up in the late 1930s and 40s. San Francisco, Oakland, the Bay Area, you know it from the Midwest. The industrial capacity of the country was slowly just taken down, where the plan had been to use it as export capacity to build up the world economy. We were going to be a leading export nation and so forth. Well, then we had the Kennedy assassination, moving forward, which was a horrific shock to the nation, and the toleration of the cover-up of that disarmed people, and a whole new generation, really. So then we had, as you mentioned, the Great Society, initiated by Lyndon Baines Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy. He launched it in 1965. But this was alongside the ongoing Vietnam War, which he initiated, supported. Blood and treasure, over $1 trillion in a modern equivalent. But the money, it's not the money, it's the resources, it's the humanity that was lost. The rioting that occurred in that period. Part of it was rioting that led up to the announcement of the Great Society, supposedly to manage really the problem not solve it.
Yeah,
But it was also
we
it was
saw that.
also the takedown of the U.S. space program. Go ahead.
Right. I was just going to say, I mean, the end of the end for the city of Detroit was the riots of 1967, which there's no question the various foundations and other globalist type institutions certainly fostered, although you could see the handwriting on the wall a couple of years earlier, because we had a very prosperous middle-class Black area in the city of Detroit, which the authorities chose to bulldoze in order to put a 2-mile expressway, 2 or 3 mile expressway through the middle of the city of Detroit. So you already had the stable areas destabilized, then came along the riots. And here in Washington, D.C., I mean, they were all over the country. My generation, you know, sort of grew up with graduating in the middle of a riot, which undermined the sense of progress and optimism, which had driven us before that.
Administration, yeah.
And then, as you were just about to say, the takedown of the space program.
So the deindustrialization continued through this period, and the shrinking number of productive jobs available to young men, women. You know, this was catastrophic in its overall effect. And the Great Society program really did not contribute anything to actually creating a great society. It didn't even ameliorate problems. And if you take mental health, for example, which bears very much on this question of homelessness, we shrank the number of mental hospitals, VA rehab mental units, 24/7 residential units across the country. We shrank the number of beds by 2/3, while the population of the United States doubled between the early 1960s and 2015. So where did those people go? Those people ended up in the streets, or they ended up in jails, or some combination of both. We were not caring for them. We were not treating them. Instead, you know, we were managing them. And of course, there was drug maintenance and, you know, all of this sort of thing. And then we ended up now we're proposing to put them in containers, you know, the Housing First program, which is the Biden administration, an ongoing program for the last 20 years, just said, stick them in houses. Don't treat them, or we'll try to offer a little bit here and there. But, you know, hey, we don't have the resources.
Oh, and they also don't have the intention, because most of the presidents, unfortunately, that we've had since the assassination of John Kennedy have not had the intention to actually progress our society. Too many of them have been captured or intimidated by a global elite that has a completely different conception of society.
Well, yes, and LBJ, as you recall, you know, said at least on one occasion that as he served as president, he served with a gun to his head.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think, as most people watching this podcast know, that's why Donald Trump is such an extraordinary threat, yes, because he both intends to overthrow this regime of economic destruction and pessimism, and he's not afraid of the people that have been enforcing it. So, Brian, let's give people a little bit of a sense of the difference between Trump's approach and this decades-long, as you put it, managing or putting Band-Aids on it. While you're describing it, I'm going to share the screen with Trump's actual proposal. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, and the transcript's there, and people should read it and listen to what he has to say directly. But just to quote him briefly from that, he said in his speech there in Washington, D.C., returning there after several years and seeing what had happened, the tent cities and whatnot, tent encampments. He said the following in his speech: the homeless need to go to shelters, the long-term mentally ill need to go to institutions, and the unhoused drug addicts need to go to rehab. That's tough love. That's the approach that's required. And compare this to San Francisco, for example, where you have city-sponsored drug injection sites. This is, this is not managing a problem. This is extending the disaster, a humanitarian disaster. But at the same time, we can't separate culture from economics. Trump is committed to rebuilding the U.S. as a great manufacturing superpower. He continues to emphasize that. He has a spirit of optimism about what he thinks the country can do, building 10 new cities in the West on federal land, and so on. So, it's in this context that he's saying, look, we can do this. We can put these people that need help, we can put them in temporary tent cities. We can provide there the concentrated medical care, psychologists and other psychiatric and other care that's required, and work this problem through, resolve it once and for all for the country. So that's his approach, in summary.
Yeah. And he makes it very clear that you're going to give people two choices. You either move to one of these locations where you're going to get housing, you're going to get food, you're going to get training, you're going to get medical care, you're going to get drug rehabilitation and so on, or you're going to go to jail. I remember a broadcast that Tucker Carlson did with a woman who had been addicted, and she made the point that the only way she got clean was the tough love question. She was sent to jail. She got rehabilitation there. If people are ready to move and into one of these facilities that Trump wants to set up, and get the help they need there, but otherwise, we got to give these people help. This is not a civil right. This is a disease.
Right. This woke approach has just got to go. I mean, look, the decriminalization of drugs, the pardoning for lesser crimes, et cetera, that's all, basically been put through the legal system. Among its effects was to basically zero out the drug courts that directed people arrested for drug problems, drug possession, criminal activity, to offer them the alternative of drug rehabilitation programs, tough love drug rehabilitation programs. Well, you decriminalize drugs, that just went out the window. Yeah. So you left these people without help.
And as we know, our organization having written a book back in the 1970s called Dope Incorporated, these are not random policies. This is a policy of a global financial elite which uses drugs both for money laundering and for financial control and to control your population. So as you said, Brian, Trump's proposal is not in a vacuum. I mean, he's putting this forward in the context of a very aggressive policy to rebuild the country with 10 new cities and manufacturing and the space program and so on. This is where I'd like to get to your really fascinating proposal that you've advanced for several years now of a space CCC, which to me begins to deal with the question of how do you transition people? Let's say you get them into areas where they start to get the help, where they want to reintegrate into society. How do we transition them into a situation, especially the young people, where they actually could be engaged in productive jobs?
Well, I've proposed, and LaRouchePAC has advocated for a space CCC, referencing back to the CCC program, the Civilian Conservation Program of the 1930s and early 1940s, where millions of young men went through a program of skilled learning skills, working, work study, if you will. You had skilled advisors, training in crafts. You had healthcare provided. This program was run and provided. There was over 1,000 camps, 1,600 camps, I believe was the number, provided by the Army Quartermaster General, supplied all these camps. But these were working camps, and these young men sent $22, $25 out of every $30 a month they got in pay, that went home to their families, children, or siblings. So this was the initiative, and it was a program loved by Republicans and Democrats, every state. It was the most popular program of the FDR era. So fast forward to today, a space CC program. Our younger generations are excited again about space. You know, they see what Elon Musk and SpaceX is doing, along with the Project Artemis program that was initiated by Trump. All right, let's build on that. We've got to create the next generation of engineers, scientists, productive, skilled workers. If we're going to double, triple manufacturing in the United States, we need hundreds of thousands of additional skilled machinists, specializing in a number of areas. We need, likewise, with welders, electricians, and you can go on. Space CC, combined with large infrastructure projects, wedded like to these new cities that Trump proposes to build, the Freedom Cities built in the West. You know, camps can be set up, or you can call them campuses, can be set up adjacent to these projects. You can take advantage of these skilled workers that are working on the project to come and train, and vice versa. The up and coming new workforce can join in the construction, you know, from the basic clearing of land and on up, and learning construction techniques and so on and so forth. So that's just a simple example. Likewise, in urban areas, whether rural or urban, we have so much to do. We need nurses. We need hospitals built. All of this can be very much part of a space CCC program, you know, that would take in 600,000 to 1 million young men and potentially women, depending on how it's set up, a year into a program that would be roughly 3 years long, maybe more, a little less, but roughly in that time frame. And you would have available at each one of these campuses, you know, the tools, the skilled, as I said, we could skilled workmen, retirees, skilled retirees can come in, not only contribute, but they can be paid for their contribution. Transitioning veterans, again, I mean, these all can be integrated into this effort. And as part of this, of course, you're taking these young men and women, you know, 12% of our youth live in deep poverty. You're taking them out of these conditions, you know, where drugs proliferate and so forth, and you're putting them into a living, breathing, creative situation, right? And culture is going to be an incredibly important aspect to this, as I emphasize. Choruses in each one of these campuses, introducing classical polyphonic music, you know, celebrating the creative capacities and helping them unfold. So that's how I would summarize. There's so much more that could be said.
It's just such a stark contrast between, you know, the oligarchical system that has been imposed upon us, where especially the younger generation has just been beaten down into a kind of bestial identity with no hope for the future, and just basically, you know, dulling the pain with drugs and transgenderism and insane music and so on and so forth. And I'll come back to the fact that when Trump spoke of his freedom cities, which he said, we want them to be beautiful. So again, I come back to the fact that none of these proposals which Trump is making, or which we have advanced at LaRouchePAC over the years, are like a series of individual, you know, things that are being thrown out there. It's part of a decision which has to be made as a nation.
It's a package.
Yeah, that we're going to reverse course, and we're actually going to create a renaissance in the United States. And, you know, you put forward the idea of this space.
And let me just add just briefly, that's tier one, you know, the kids kicked to the curb. Tier two is the young men and women coming out of community colleges or coming out of high schools or having their GEDs, and you want to plug them into parallel programs that are expanded, and then we expand the capacities of our community colleges, apprenticeship programs, and so forth to immediately harness these young men and potentially women again immediately into these productive jobs as we're growing out a new productive economy.
And you have to have a mission. The nation has to have a mission to do that. And Trump has given us that mission, 10 new freedom cities, the Artemis Project. We've added to that, and it'll be a topic of a future discussion, Project Prometheus, which is that we need 1,000 new nuclear plants over the coming decades if we'll actually have the energy to do this. So when you start to wrap your mind around all of this, you think about the skilled workforce that we need. It puts in even starker highlight the tragedy of young people and others just being thrown on the scrap heap in these homeless encampments that have been fostered like petri dishes, really, around the country. Yeah. So as we said in the last,
and I think you'll find it'll fire your imagination.
Exactly.
Wrap your mind around what we can do.
As we said in the last podcast, as I asked you in the last podcast, imagine sitting down with Donald Trump and making the case for building one of these freedom cities in Farmington. So I think you've begun to also make the case, and maybe someday you will be able to sit down with Donald Trump for why you have to add this question of space civilian cores or other kinds of economic civilian cores, both to his proposal to end homelessness and to his proposal for 10 freedom cities. So I think we're on our way to continuing to sketch a picture of a completely different future for this nation than what we've been living under for too many decades. So if there's anything you want to say to wrap it up, Brian?
No, I think that's good. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you again. And go to the LaRouchePAC website, follow our coverage of Agenda 47, share these videos with friends, and we will see you again for a future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.